The glass of the rearview mirror reflected a different Emma Kim from 3 years ago. Her eyes, once naive and dreamy, now carried an unwavering determination as she gazed at the imposing Chen Enterprises building in Seoul. The glass and steel skyscraper seemed to mock her, just as its owner had done on that fateful night. "Mommy, look!" Little Minha, sitting in the back seat, pointed excitedly at the gleaming buildings. Emma smiled at her daughter through the mirror, her heart squeezing as she noticed, once again, the same almond-shaped eyes of Jake Chen on the angelic 2-year-old's face. Parking her modest Hyundai, Emma adjusted the navy blue blazer she had carefully chosen for this occasion. After leaving Minha in the care of her best friend, Park Soo-jin, she went to the building's reception with the posture of someone carrying a secret capable of toppling empires. "Miss Kim, welcome to Chen Enterprises." The receptionist smiled warmly. "Mr. Chan is waiting for you on the 52nd floor." The panoramic elevator rose silently, each floor adding to the weight of the memories that Emma was trying to keep under control. The party 3 years ago, the misunderstanding about her presence there, Jake's cruel words, and then that one night that would change everything. The doors opened onto an elegant hallway in shades of gray and white. In the anteroom, an efficient secretary led her to a meeting room overlooking the Seoul skyline. And there he was, Jake Chen, 32, CEO of Chen Enterprises and heir to one of South Korea's largest conglomerates, stood with his back to the door, his hands in his pockets as he gazed out at the city at his feet. Emma felt her heart racing, a mixture of anger and another emotion she refused to name. "Miss Kim," he turned, his deep, controlled voice filling the room. "I confess I was intrigued by your request for a meeting, especially considering our last meeting." Emma held her chin high, her fingers discreetly clenching the folder she carried. "Mr. Chan, thank you for seeing me. I've come to discuss something that will significantly change your life." Jake arched an eyebrow, the cynical smile playing on his lips. "Change my life? How pretentious." "Perhaps you'd better sit down," Emma suggested, her firm voice masking the trembling in her hands. The office fell silent as Jake studied her face, searching for clues. Emma knew that calculating look, the same one that had assessed her at the party 3 years ago, when he mistook her for an opportunist trying to infiltrate his social circle. "You know," he began, taking a seat at the head of the meeting table, "I have a strict policy about people from your background trying to make claims." Emma opened her briefcase methodically, ignoring the provocation. "I'm not here to make claims, Mr. Chan. I'm here to present facts." She slid a photograph across the polished table. Jake picked it up with disinterest, but his expression changed instantly when he saw the image of Minha on her 2nd birthday, blowing out candles with a smile identical to his own as a child. "That's," her voice faltered for the first time. "Your daughter," Emma added, carefully observing every micro-expression on her face. "My Kim Chen, 2 years and 3 months old." The silence that followed was deafening. Jake alternated his gaze between the photo and Emma, his mask of ruthless CEO beginning to crack. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice betrayed the certainty he was trying to demonstrate. That night you made a point of forgetting?" Emma interrupted, years of hurt overflowing in her words. "The night you treated me like an opportunist, only to then, enough." Jake stood up abruptly, his hands resting on the table. "What do you want? Money?" Emma felt her cheeks burn with indignation. "I want you to take responsibility, not for the money, but because MY deserves to know who your father is." The CEO wiped his hands across his face, his usual composure visibly shaken. Emma noticed, for the first time, the dark circles under his eyes, the worry lines that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "Why now?" he finally asked, his voice softer. "Why wait so long?" "Because I needed to be sure," Emma replied, surprising herself with her own honesty. "Sure that I could face you again. Certainty that I was doing it for me, and not for revenge." Jake sat back down, his eyes fixed on the photograph of his daughter. "Did you say mine? It's a beautiful name. It means bright in Korean," Emma explained, feeling an unexpected twinge when she saw how gently he touched the photo. "She's extremely intelligent for her age." An involuntary smile appeared on Jake's lips, quickly replaced by his professional expression. I'm going to need a DNA test. Naturally. Naturally, Emma agreed, already prepared for this request. But you already know the truth, don't you? Just look at it. Jake tucked the photograph into his inside jacket pocket, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Emma. My assistant will be in touch to arrange the necessary procedures. And Emma, he hesitated, something rare in his usual persona. I'm sorry for the way I treated you that night. Emma stood up, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. It's not me you owe an apology to, Mr. Chun. It's to your daughter, for the 3 years of absence. As she left the office, Emma felt the weight of the last 3 years on her shoulders. Her planned revenge, the compromising documents she had collected, all seemed less important now, because in the brief moments that Jake looked at the photo of Minha, she saw something she hadn't expected: vulnerability. What Emma didn't know was that, as she rode down the elevator, Jake Chun was watching the city through his panoramic window, Minha's photograph in his hands, struggling with memories of his own childhood marked by paternal absence. And for the first time in years, the ruthless CEO allowed himself to feel afraid of the future that was unfolding in front of him. Emma's apartment in Gangnam was silent when she returned from Chown Enterprises. Soo-jin was playing quietly with Minha in the living room, building a castle out of colored blocks. The sight of his daughter, so innocent and oblivious to the storm brewing, made his heart squeeze. How was it? Soo-jin asked quietly, while Minha continued to play with her toys. Emma collapsed on the sofa, letting out a long sigh. Different from what I expected. He's changed. Mom. Emma ran to her, her small arms outstretched for a hug. Emma wrapped her arms around her tightly, inhaling the soft scent of baby shampoo. Jake's same eyes stared at her with unconditional love, making her resolve waver. After Soo-jin left, Emma was preparing dinner when her phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. Hansung Medical Lab, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Jake Chun. Straight to the point as always, she muttered to herself, involuntarily remembering that night 3 years ago. Flashback, the launch party for Chown Enterprises' new venture glittered on the top floor of the Lotte Hotel. Emma was only there because her friend Soo-jin, the event's public relations officer, had insisted that she go out for a while. Freshly graduated and starting her career as a teacher, Emma felt out of place among businessmen and socialites. That's when she bumped into Jake Chen. Sorry, her words died when she met those intense eyes. Which modeling agency do you represent? He asked dryly, his eyes assessing her simple dress. I'm a teacher, Emma replied, feeling her cheeks burn. His smile turned cynical. Of course you are. And I assume you accidentally bumped into me? The humiliation of that moment still burned in her memory. But what came next? The unexpected encounter in the hotel bar, the mumbled apologies after a few drinks, and then, present, Mom, history. Minha's voice brought her back to the present. It was time for their evening ritual. While reading The Little Mermaid for the 1000th time, Emma noticed how her daughter frowned just like Jake when concentrating, little gestures that made it impossible to deny their paternity. The next morning, the medical laboratory was practically empty when Emma arrived with Mai. Jake was already there, wearing an impeccable suit that contrasted with his more pronounced dark circles. Good morning, he said formally, his eyes fixed on Minha, who was hiding behind Emma's legs. Minha, this is... Emma hesitated. Mr. Chun, Jake completed quickly, crouching down to be at the girl's height. Do you like teddy bears? Emma nodded shyly. Jake took a small teddy bear out of his jacket pocket and offered it to her. Emma watched in surprise as he prepared for this moment. The procedure was quick and painless. While they were waiting for the preliminary results, Jake surprised Emma again. Does she go to school? Not yet. She starts kindergarten next semester. Chown Enterprises has an executive nursery in the main building, he commented, apparently casually. The best teachers, maximum security. No, Emma cut in. I don't want her growing up in that environment. Jake stared at her, something akin to sorrow crossing his face. Because it's the environment I grew up in? Because it's an environment where children are seen as investments, not people. The silence that followed was heavy. Minha was playing with her new bear, oblivious to the tension between the adults. My father, Jake began, surprising Emma with his sudden vulnerability, had the same business vision for everything, even family. Is that why you've become like him? The words escaped before Emma could stop them. Jake stood up abruptly, but before he could reply, the doctor returned with the preliminary results. As expected, positive. I want to be a part of her life, Jake declared as they left the lab. Not like a monthly check, but really participate. Emma watched Minha, who was now asleep in her arms. You don't even know her? Then give me a chance to get to know her, he asked, his voice losing its businesslike tone. Have dinner with me today. The three of us. I need to understand everything. Emma hesitated. Her original plan for revenge seemed more and more distant, replaced by something more complex and frightening. The possibility of redemption. At 7, she finally agreed. But not in fancy restaurants. I know a place in Hongdae where she'll feel comfortable. Jake nodded, unconsciously adjusting his tie. Thank you, he said simply, but his eyes conveyed much more. As she watched her luxury car drive away, Emma realized that she was entering dangerous territory, not just because of the complexity of introducing a father into Minha's life, but because, as she watched Jake interact with her daughter, old emotions that she thought she had buried began to awaken. What she didn't know was that, in his office, Jake Chun was canceling all his meetings for the day for the first time in his career, lost in thought about a little girl with his eyes and about past mistakes that now demanded redemption. Emma's chosen restaurant in Hongdae was a family-run establishment, with wooden tables and walls decorated with old photographs of Seoul. Jake Chun looked out of place in his Italian suit, but his eyes followed Minha's every move with an intensity that Emma couldn't ignore. I want that one. Minha pointed excitedly at a plate of tteokbokki on the illustrated menu, hugging the teddy bear Jake had given her earlier. Isn't it too spicy for her? Jake asked, his genuine concern surprising Emma. She inherited my tolerance for spicy food, Emma replied, an involuntary smile appearing as she remembered how mine had loved strong flavors ever since she was little. The waitress took their orders, casting curious glances at the unusual trio. Jake loosened his tie, a gesture Emma recognized from 3 years ago, when he had let his guard down. Why didn't you ever come to me? The question came suddenly, as Minha distracted herself by coloring the children's placemat. Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. You made it very clear that morning what you thought of me. Flashback. That was a mistake, Jake had said, already dressed and distant, the first rays of the sun seeping through the hotel window. My assistant will arrange a confidentiality agreement. Agreement? Emma tasted the bitterness of humiliation. Do you think Let's be practical, he interrupted coldly. How much? Present. I was different back then, Jake admitted, his voice low. My father had just died, the company was in crisis, and I was just another problem to solve, Emma added bitterly. Before Jake could reply, the plates arrived. Emma clapped excitedly at the sight of her tteokbokki, her eyes shining with anticipation. Careful, it's hot, Jake warned instinctively, surprising himself with his fatherly tone. Emma watched as he hesitantly took a napkin and gently wiped some sauce from Minha's face. It was like watching a man discover a part of himself he didn't know existed. What's she like, normally? Jake asked after a few moments of silence. Day to day? Emma smiled, thinking of all the little things that made mine unique. She loves music. She spends hours singing those nursery rhymes that stick in your head. And she's stubborn, she added with a meaningful glance at Jake. Once she's made up her mind, it's impossible to change her mind. Like Dad, Jake muttered, more to himself than to Emma. Dinner continued with a strange familiarity, as if they were rehearsing for a play that neither of them knew exactly how to perform. Mine, in its innocence, served as a bridge between two worlds that had once collided violently. Daddy? The word came unexpectedly from Minha's lips, making both Emma and Jake freeze. Are you my daddy? The restaurant seemed to have gone completely silent. Jake looked at Emma, lost, seeking guidance. Yes, Minha, Emma replied softly. Mr. Chun is your father. Why haven't you come before? The innocent question carried the weight of 3 years' absence. Jake swallowed, his CEO mask completely dissolved. I didn't know about you, little one, but now that I do, I really want to get to know you better. If your mother will let me. Emma felt her heart squeeze. Her planned revenge seemed more and more distant in the face of the reality in front of her. A child wanting to get to know her father, a man trying to make amends for his mistakes. Tomorrow is Park Day, Minha announced, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Are you going? Jake looked at Emma, a silent plea in his eyes. If your mother agrees, I'd love to go to the park with you. Emma knew she was entering dangerous territory. Every moment they spent together made it harder to keep her original resolution. But when she saw Minha smile, so pure and hopeful, she realized that some revenges cost more than their worth. Udo Park at 2, she finally agreed. At the end of dinner, when Jake said goodbye with a shy nod to Minha, Emma noticed something different in his eyes. A glint of determination she knew well, but now directed not at business or power, but at something much more precious. On the way home, Minha slept in the back seat, clutching her teddy bear. Emma looked at her daughter through the rearview mirror, thinking about how a single night 3 years ago had changed their lives forever. And now, another night was changing everything again. But in a way she could never have predicted. Her phone vibrated with a message from Jake. Thanks for today. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but I promise to make it different this time. Emma put the phone away without replying, but the words kept echoing in her mind. As she carried my sleeper back to her apartment, she realized that sometimes fate has different plans from ours, and that maybe, just maybe, the real cure lay not in revenge, but in forgiveness. Udo Park glistened in the afternoon sun as Emma watched Jake pushing Minha on the swing. It was surreal to see the powerful CEO of Chin Enterprises with his sleeves rolled up, smiling genuinely as his daughter shouted, "Higher, higher. Look, Mommy." Minha waved, her laughter echoing through the park. Emma waved back, fighting the feeling that something was irrevocably changing. Jake looked different today, wearing jeans and a casual shirt. He still attracted glances. It was impossible not to notice his imposing presence. But there was a softness to his gestures that Emma had never seen before. Ice cream. Minha pointed to a street vendor, her eyes shining with anticipation. It could be dangerous. Does she have any allergies? Jake asked Emma, his paternal concern coming naturally. No, she conceded. But no chocolate. It makes her too agitated. As Jake took Minha to choose her ice cream, Emma's phone vibrated. It was Sue Jean. How's the family reunion going? Emma typed quickly, confused. He's different. Different like that night? Flashback, the hotel bar was almost empty when Emma decided to have one last drink before leaving. The humiliation of her encounter with Jake Chan was still burning. Can I sit down? The deep voice surprised her. Jake was standing there, his tie loosened, looking more human. I came to apologize, he continued, ordering a whiskey. My behavior was inappropriate. 1 drink became 2, 2 became 3. Jake talked about the pressure of taking over the company after his father's sudden death, about overwhelming expectations. Emma shared her dreams of making a difference as a teacher. You're different, he murmured, his eyes softening. Real. Present. Mom, look what I won. Minha's voice brought her back. She was holding not only an ice cream, but also a small stuffed panda. Jake, I know. I shouldn't spoil her, he defended himself, but his smile betrayed him. But you should have seen her eyes when she saw the panda. They walked through the park, between the two of them, holding their hands. To any observer, they looked like a normal family enjoying a Sunday. My dad never had time for that, Jake remarked quietly, watching Minha run to the playground. There was always a more important meeting, some unavoidable piece of business. Emma studied him, noticing the shadows in his eyes. Is that why you're trying to be different? I'm trying to be better, he corrected. When I saw her picture, it was as if something awoke inside me, something I didn't even know existed. A group of children called Minha over to play, and she happily ran over to join them. Jake and Emma sat on a nearby bench, keeping an eye on their daughter. You could have used her against me, Jake said suddenly. You could have exposed everything to the press, ruined my reputation. Believe me, "I've thought about it," Emma admitted. "I spent nights awake, planning how to make you pay for everything." "What's changed?" Emma observed Minha jokingly, her pure laughter echoing through the park. I realized that she deserved more than a revenge story. She deserved the chance to get to know her father, even if he made mistakes. Jake was silent for a moment, processing his words. "Do you know what scares me the most? It's not the responsibility of being a father. It's the fear of already loving her so much after just 2 days." The confession caught Emma off guard. Before she could reply, Minha came running back, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Daddy, come and play hide and seek." "Daddy" came out so naturally that both adults felt the impact of the word. Jake looked at Emma, silently asking permission. "Go," she nodded. "She needs it." As she watched father and daughter playing, Emma felt her phone vibrate again. It was an email from the law firm she had hired to gather evidence against Jake. They had found something significant about Chen Enterprises' questionable practices. Emma looked at the screen, then at Jake crouched behind a tree while Minha searched for him, laughing. With a sigh, she deleted the email without reading it. "I found you," Minha shouted triumphantly, jumping into Jake's arms. The sun was beginning to set when they decided to call it a day. Minha was asleep in Jake's arms as they walked to the parking lot. "She's perfect," he murmured, carefully transferring her to Emma's car. "She is," Emma agreed, adjusting her seatbelt. "And that's why we need to do this right, Jake. No games, no masks." "I promise," he said, his voice carrying a sincerity Emma hadn't heard since that night in the bar. "Can I see you again tomorrow?" Emma hesitated, aware of the delicate territory they were entering. "Let's go slowly. How about Wednesday? She has a performance at the music school." Jake's face lit up. "She takes music lessons?" "Piano. She started 2 months ago." "I'll be there," he promised, and Emma knew he wouldn't miss it. As she drove home, Emma looked through the rearview mirror at her sleeping daughter, still cuddled up to the new panda. The revenge plan she had nurtured for so long was dissolving, replaced by something more complex and frightening. Hope. What Emma didn't know was that very night, Jake Chun sat in his empty office, looking at old photos of his own lonely childhood, determined to break the cycle his father had started. The music school in Apgujeongdong glowed under the early evening lights. Emma adjusted the bow in Minha's hair, who sat still on the small piano bench, eager for her first performance. "What if I make a mistake, Mommy?" Minha whispered, biting her lower lip just like Jake did when he was nervous. A detail that didn't go unnoticed by Emma. "You're going to be wonderful, my love. Remember what Professor Kim said. Take a deep breath and feel the music." The auditorium began to fill with proud parents wielding cameras and cell phones. Emma nervously checked her watch. Jake had promised to come, but knowing his busy schedule, "Is he coming?" Mine asked, her eyes scanning the audience anxiously. Before Emma could answer, Jake appeared at the entrance to the auditorium, still in his business suit, but carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked bigger than mine. "Sorry I'm late," he approached, panting. The traffic in Gangnam was impossible. Minha's eyes lit up at the sight of the flowers. "Are they for me?" "Of course they are," Jake smiled, handing over the bouquet that made Minha practically disappear behind him. "Flowers for my little pianist." Emma noticed the curious looks from the other parents. Certainly, the CEO of Chin Enterprises was not a common presence at school music recitals. "Ladies and gentlemen," Teacher Kim's voice echoed over the sound system. "Welcome to our quarterly performance. Gotta go." Mine hugged the flowers and then, surprising everyone, hugged Jake quickly before running backstage. Emma and Jake sat side by side, a tension-filled silence between them. The performances began, nervous little pianists playing their carefully rehearsed pieces. "My mother was a pianist," Jake remarked quietly, as a little girl played Mozart. "She gave lessons before she met my father." Emma looked at him, surprised by the personal revelation. "Does she still play?" "She passed away when I was 12, Jake replied, his eyes fixed on the stage. "Cancer." After that, my father changed. He became colder, more focused only on business. Before Emma could process this information, Minha took to the stage. Her light blue dress sparkled under the lights, and she looked so small in front of the grand piano. The melody began softly, Beethoven's, for Elise. Emma recognized the hours of practice, each note carefully memorized. Next to her, Jake was completely still, absorbing his daughter's every move. At one point, Minha hesitated slightly, but continued exactly as they had practiced. Emma felt Jake hold his breath beside her. When the last note sounded, the auditorium erupted in applause. Minha bowed slightly, her eyes immediately searching the audience for her parents. The smile that lit up her face when she saw them giving her a standing ovation made Emma's heart squeeze. After the performance, as the families gathered for photos and congratulations, Jake surprised Emma again. "Can I take you to dinner? To celebrate?" Emma hesitated. "Jake, it's a weeknight, and Mai has school tomorrow. Please, Mom," Emma begged, still holding her huge bouquet. "Just tonight." The Italian restaurant Jake had chosen was elegant but cozy. Minha was beaming, excitedly telling him about how she had practiced in secret to surprise them. "Did you know that your grandmother also played the piano?" Jake mentioned casually, making Mine's eyes widen. "Really? Was she any good?" "The best," Jake smiled, but Emma noticed the shadow of sadness in his eyes. "She used to say that music is the language of the heart. What was she like?" Mine asked, completely fascinated by this unexpected connection to her family history. Jake took out his wallet and removed an old, slightly yellowed photo. An elegant woman was smiling next to a piano, her hands resting delicately on the keys. "Her name was Men Sue," he explained, passing the photo over for me to examine. "She would have loved you." Emma watched the interaction, realizing how Jake was slowly sharing parts of himself that he had probably kept hidden for years. "Can I learn the music she used to play?" Mine asked hopefully. "I have some of her sheet music saved," Jake replied, his voice soft. "If your mother allows, I can bring them to you." Dinner continued with an intimacy that frightened Emma. It was as if the barriers they had built up over the years were slowly dissolving, leaving something more vulnerable and real in their place. When they finally said goodbye, Minha was already dozing off in the back seat of Emma's car, hugging her bouquet. "Thank you for today," Jake said, his voice carrying an emotion that Emma couldn't quite put into words. "Watching her play, it was like my mother was there somehow." "Jake," Emma hesitated, choosing her words carefully, "why haven't you talked about your mother before?" "Some pains are easier to bury than to face," he replied, looking at my sleeping one. "But now, I want her to know all the parts of your story, the good and the difficult." As they drove home, Emma reflected on how life had strange ways of connecting people. The music that once brought joy to Men Sue now flowed through her granddaughter's small hands, creating bridges over chasms of time and sorrow. In his executive apartment, Jake spent hours searching through old boxes until he found his mother's sheet music, each yellowed page containing more than just musical notes. They were memories of a time when music and love filled their home, before silence and expectations took over. And somewhere between the melodies of the past and the promises of the future, both Emma and Jake were beginning to realize that some symphonies need time to be fully understood. The Chen Enterprises skyscraper cast its imposing shadow over the streets of Seoul as Jake watched the city through his panoramic window. In his hands, his mother's old sheet music brought back memories he had buried for so long. "Mr. Chen, your meeting with the council starts in 5 minutes, his assistant announced over the intercom. Jake adjusted his tie, carefully storing the sheet music in his briefcase. The company's board had been buzzing ever since rumors about his newfound paternity began circulating in the corporate corridors. In the meeting room, serious faces awaited him. Park Sung-ho, the oldest member of the board and a close friend of his late father, was the first to speak. "Jake, there are worrying rumors circulating about a child," Sung-ho began, his tone calculatedly neutral. "The board is apprehensive about possible complications." "My daughter is not a complication," Jake replied firmly, surprising everyone with his frankness. "And yes, I intend to officially recognize her." The hubbub that followed was interrupted by a message on his cell phone. It was a photo of Emma, Mine practicing the piano at home, concentrating on the sheet music he had sent her. Chun Enterprises has a tradition to uphold, another advisor intervened. A child born out of wedlock, a tradition built by my father. Jake cut in, a new determination in his voice. But I'm in charge now. After the stormy meeting, Jake drove to the conservatory where his mother used to teach. The old building remained largely unchanged, with its classical columns and tall windows. "Young me," he called out to the old lady who still ran the place. "Long time no see." "Little Jake?" She adjusted her glasses, a smile lighting up her wrinkled face. Or should I say, President Chun now? Sitting in his cozy office, surrounded by old photographs of students, Jake shared the story of Minha. "Your mother would be thrilled," young me commented, pouring tea. "She always said that music was the most valuable inheritance she could leave." "I came to ask a favor," Jake hesitated. "My daughter is starting piano and—" "Tell her she can come whenever she wants," young me added, understanding immediately. "This place will always be part of the Chen family." That evening, Emma received an unexpected message from Jake. "Can I come by to show my something?" The conservatory was silent when they arrived, only a few distant notes echoing through the corridors. Young me welcomed them warmly, her eyes sparkling at the sight of Minha. "She's identical to you as a child, Jake," she commented, leading them through the building. Emma watched intently as Jake showed Minha the room where his grandmother used to teach. An old photo on the wall showed Sue sitting at the piano, surrounded by smiling students. "This is where she spent her afternoons," Jake explained softly to Minha, "teaching kids like you to love music." "Can I play?" Minha asked, staring in awe at the grand piano in the center of the room. Young me nodded, and soon the notes of "For Elise" filled the room. Emma noticed how Jake closed his eyes briefly, as if the memories hit him in waves. "She has the same soft touch as Sue," young me commented softly. "It's like time has turned completely around." After the little impromptu performance, young me surprised everyone by offering private lessons to Minha. "It would be an honor to carry on your grandmother's legacy," she said with emotion. On the way back, Minha was asleep in the back seat, while Emma drove in contemplative silence. "Thank you for today," she finally said, "for sharing this part of your story with her." "Emma," Jake began, his voice laden with restrained emotion, "the council is putting pressure on me. They want me to keep everything a secret. And what are you going to do?" "I'm going to officially recognize her," he replied without hesitation. "I'm not going to repeat my father's mistakes. I'm not going to choose the company over the family again." Emma felt her heart race at the determination in his voice. The Jake she had met 3 years ago would never have defied the council like that. "It's going to be hard for her," Emma warned. "The media, the expectations. That's why I need your help," Jake admitted. "We need to prepare her together for what's to come." When they pulled up in front of Emma's apartment, Jake hesitated before getting out of the car. "Young me gave me these." He pulled an envelope out of his pocket. "They're old photos of my mother's performances. I thought mine would like some." Emma took the envelope, her fingers brushing lightly against his. "She'll love them." That night, after putting Minha to bed, Emma examined the photographs. In one of them, a young Sue was smiling at the piano, her eyes shining with the same intensity she now saw in her granddaughter. Her phone vibrated with a message from Sue Jean. "I saw the news. The board of Chen Enterprises is in an uproar. Are you sure you know what you're getting into?" Emma looked at the door to Minha's room, where she could hear her daughter breathing softly in her sleep. "Some things are worth the risk," she replied, carefully tucking the photos away in Minha's memory box. What she didn't know was that, at that very moment, Jake was in his office, drafting the document that would change everything. The official recognition of Minha as heir to the Chen Empire. The news exploded like a bomb on South Korea's main news portals. Chen Enterprises heir recognizes 2-year-old daughter. Emma turned off her cell phone after the 10th call from reporters, watching through the window as photographers began to crowd in front of her building. "Mom, why are there so many people down there?" asked Minha, interrupting her piano practice. Before Emma could answer, her phone vibrated with a message from Jake. "I'm sending security. Pack a bag for a few days. My driver will be here in 15 minutes. The penthouse Jake had prepared in Gangnam was a sanctuary of luxury and privacy. Minha ran excitedly around the large space, enchanted by the panoramic view of the city. "Sorry about that," Jake showed up an hour later, looking exhausted. The leak was deliberate. Someone from the council wanted to force my hand. Emma noted the worry lines on his face. You knew it would happen eventually. Yes, but I wanted it to be on our terms. He loosened his tie, a gesture Emma already recognized as a sign of stress. Park Sung-ho has called an extraordinary meeting for tomorrow. They want to question my leadership skills. Because of me? Because of my lack of commitment to traditional company values, Jake quoted bitterly. The same words they used with my mother when she refused to leave the conservatory after marrying my father. Young me had called earlier, worried about the sudden exposure. Minha's piano lessons would have to be temporarily suspended until the dust settled. Daddy, look. Minha called out from the living room, where she had discovered the grand piano. Can I play here? Jake's face instantly softened. Of course, little one. This piano was your grandmother's. Emma watched as Jake sat down next to Minha on the piano bench, guiding her small hands across the keys. It was surreal how, in just a few weeks, he had transformed from a distant CEO into a devoted father. Mr. Chan, his personal assistant, entered quietly. The lawyers are here to discuss the strategy for tomorrow. Jake hesitated, looking at me. Go, Emma said softly. We'll be fine. The meeting stretched into the night. Emma put Minha to bed in the guest room, hastily decorated with some toys and children's books that Jake had provided. Mommy, Minha called sleepily. Why are people mad at Daddy? Emma sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes people find it hard to accept change, but your father is doing the right thing. It was after midnight when Jake finally emerged from his office. Emma found him in the living room, gazing out at the bright city through the windows. The council wants me to get married, he announced without preamble. To someone suitable, a business alliance that would appease the shareholders. Emma's heart skipped a beat. And what are you going to do? What do you think I should do? He turned to face her, his eyes carrying a vulnerability she rarely saw. I think you already know the answer, Emma replied softly. Otherwise, you wouldn't have risked everything to acknowledge me publicly. Jake approached, stopping a few steps away from her. You know what's ironic? I spent years building walls around myself, convinced that this was the way to lead a company. And it only took one single night to change everything. Jake, no, let me finish, he interrupted gently. When I saw Minha for the first time, I recognized in her everything I tried to repress in myself. The joy of music, the freedom to be authentic, everything that my mother valued and that my father tried to erase. From the bedroom came the soft sound of my sleeping breath. Emma realized that they were too close, the air between them charged with unresolved tension. Tomorrow, Jake continued, his voice low, I'm going to face the council, not just but for myself, for my mother, for everything we've sacrificed in the name of tradition. And if they vote against you, then I'll build something new, he replied with surprising serenity. Something that I can inherit with pride, not wait. The sound of his phone broke the moment. Another urgent message from the legal department. You should rest, Emma suggested, taking a step back. Tomorrow will be a difficult day. Jake nodded, but before he turned around, he asked, will you be there? At the meeting? Are you sure you want that? I want them to see exactly what I'm fighting for, he replied. A royal family, not a business alliance. That night, while the city slept under the glow of artificial lights, 3 people under the same roof represented a seismic shift in the Chen Empire. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over Seoul, a new battle would begin, not for power or tradition, but for the right to choose one's own path. The Chen Enterprises boardroom pulsed with tension as Jake Chen entered, followed by Emma and, to everyone's surprise, Minha. The little girl, wearing a navy blue dress that matched her father's suit, held Emma's hand tightly. Park Sung-ho, sitting at the head of the table, couldn't hide his displeasure. Jake, this is a council meeting, not a nursery school. This meeting is about family and legacy, Jake replied calmly, helping Minha to sit between him and Emma. I thought it was appropriate for my daughter to be present. The other council members exchanged uncomfortable glances. On the wall behind them, the portraits of the former chairman of Chen Enterprises seemed to observe the scene with silent disapproval. Before we begin, Sung Ho huffed. I'd like to introduce Miss Sarah Yum. An elegant young woman entered the room, wearing an impeccable suit, daughter of the CEO of Young Corporation, a possible alliance that would benefit both companies. Emma felt her stomach flit as she noticed the calculated look Sarah threw at Jake. Mine, sensing the tension, squeezed her mother's hand. We're not here to discuss wedding rings, Jake cut in dryly. We're here because you question my leadership based on outdated prejudices. Prejudices? Another board member quipped. It's about preserving the company's reputation. An illegitimate child. Watch your words, Jake interrupted, his voice dangerously low. You're talking about my daughter. Emma noticed Jake's fingers trembling slightly as he opened his briefcase. From it, he pulled out an old photo. Min Soo at the piano, surrounded by her students. My mother, he began, his voice carrying a restrained emotion, was forced to choose between her passion for music and her role as the wife of a Chen. You called her inadequate too. Sung Ho shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been there at the time. When she fell ill, Jake continued, she spent her last days not in corporate meetings, but teaching music to underprivileged children. And you know what she told me? He paused, his eyes meeting mine. That the real legacy is not in buildings or actions, but in the lives we touch. That's very moving, Sarah interjected softly. But a company can't be run on sentimentality. No, Emma surprised everyone by speaking up. But it can be run with humanity, something that seems to have been lost here. Minha, who had been quiet until then, suddenly stood up. Can I play the piano for you? A stunned silence filled the room. Jake looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and surprise. My dear, there's no piano here, Emma began. Actually, Jake smiled. There is. He pressed a button and a panel on the wall slid open, revealing an old piano. It was my mother's. She insisted on keeping it here, saying that even the toughest men need music in their lives. Minha rushed over to the instrument, her small hands gliding reverently over the keys. And then, to everyone's amazement, she began to play the same song that Min Soo used to play at council meetings, a soft traditional Korean melody. Emma saw tears in the eyes of some of the older counselors who had known Min Soo. Sung Ho, in particular, seemed deeply affected. How did she? He murmured. Young Mi taught her, Jake explained. The same teacher who taught my mother. When Minha finished, the silence in the room was different, no longer tense, but contemplative. Gentlemen, Jake stood up. I'm not asking for permission to recognize my daughter. I'm informing you of my decision to honor all aspects of the Chen legacy, not just the profits and acquisitions, but also the humanity and artistry that my mother valued so much. Sarah Jung stood up discreetly and left the room, realizing that her presence was no longer necessary. What if the council doesn't agree? Sung Ho asked, but his voice had lost its previous harshness. Then maybe it's time for a new direction for Chen Enterprises, Jake replied. One that doesn't force its leaders to choose between family and duty. Emma watched in amazement as one by one the board members began to nod. Minha returned to her place among her parents, unaware of the crucial role she had just played. Your mother would be proud, Sung Ho finally said, his voice breaking. Both of you and of her. He looked at me with a gentle smile. Welcome to the Chun family, little pianist. As they left the meeting room, Jake held Minha in his arms, while Emma walked beside him. The mirrored corridor reflected the image of the three of them. No longer separate fragments, but a family in the making. Did I play well, Daddy? Asked Minha sleepily, the stress of the day finally catching up with her. Perfectly, my love, Jake replied, kissing her forehead. Just like your grandmother would have done. Emma realized that, at that moment, much more than a corporate battle had been won. A cycle of pain and repression had been broken, and a new legacy, one that balanced tradition with love, was beginning. Autumn tinted the streets of Seoul with golden hues when Emma arrived at the conservatory for Minha's piano lesson. 3 months had passed since the council meeting, and the changes in their lives were as visible as the leaves dancing through the air. Miss Kim, Young Mi greeted her with a warm smile. Jake called to say he'll be a little late. Something about a new company initiative? Emma nodded. Already used to the changes Jake was implementing at Chan Enterprises. Since the confrontation with the council, he had started an ambitious project to create a cultural foundation in memory of his mother. Minha practiced with concentration, her small hands gliding across the piano with growing confidence. Youngmi watched with maternal pride, occasionally making gentle corrections to her posture. She has the same sparkle in her eyes, the teacher commented softly to Emma. That spark Min Soo had when she played. The sound of footsteps in the corridor announced Jake's arrival. He entered quietly, not wanting to interrupt Minha's practice, but Emma noticed how his face softened at the sight of his daughter at the piano. "Daddy!" Minha exclaimed as she finished her piece, running to hug him. Jake picked her up naturally, a gesture that would previously have seemed impossible for the cold CEO. "I have a surprise for you too," he announced, exchanging a meaningful glance with Youngmi. "The Men Suchin Foundation will be inaugurated next month, and our first project will be to restore this conservatory." Youngmi brought her hands up to her face in emotion. "Jake, I can't accept. It's not just about the conservatory," Jake continued, gently placing Mai on the floor. "We want to create scholarships for talented children who can't afford music lessons. It was my mother's dream." Emma watched the scene with a squeezed heart. The man in front of her was almost unrecognizable from the Jake she had met 3 years ago. His features, once always tense, now carried a serenity that only time and love could bring. "Mommy, can I show Daddy the new song I've learned?" Mine asked, pulling Jake by the hand to the piano. As her daughter played, Emma noticed how Jake closed his eyes occasionally, probably reliving memories of his own mother in that very place. Youngmi approached her discreetly. "You know, Emma," the lady began with a knowing smile, "sometimes fate has curious ways of fixing what's broken." Before Emma could reply, her phone vibrated with a message from Sujin. "We need to talk. It's about the article that's circulating online." With a sigh, Emma opened the link. It was an article in a gossip magazine speculating about her and Jake's relationship, with photos of them leaving the conservatory together the week before. "Ignoring the press only makes them make up more stories," Jake commented softly behind her, having noticed her worried expression. "And what do you suggest?" Emma asked, trying to keep her voice neutral despite his proximity. "Dinner with me tonight," he replied with a simplicity that caught her off guard. "No me, no cameras, no expectations. Just the two of us talking about everything." The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Youngmi had taken Minha to show her some old sheet music, leaving them momentarily alone. "Jake, you don't have to answer now," he interrupted gently. "But Emma, at some point we need to face what's happening between us." The sound of Minha's laughter echoed down the corridor, bringing them back to the present. Jake moved away discreetly, keeping a professional distance when Youngmi and Minha returned. "Look, Mom." Minha proudly showed a yellowed piece of sheet music. It was Grandma Min Soo's. Emma took the sheet carefully, recognizing the delicate handwriting in the marginal notes. It was an original composition, entitled, "For My Little Jake." "I've never seen this one before," Jake murmured, his voice breaking as he recognized the song. "She must have written it when she knew you were ill," Youngmi added softly. "She wanted to leave something special for you." The silence that followed was filled only by the distant sound of other students practicing in nearby rooms. Emma watched as Jake struggled to keep his composure, his hands slightly trembling as he held the sheet music. "Dude," he crouched down to meet his daughter. "How about we learn this song together? We can practice at home." The girl's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "On Grandma's piano?" "Yes, on Grandma's piano," Jake smiled, and Emma realized that some wounds take generations to heal completely. As they said goodbye to Youngmi, the sun was already setting over Seoul, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Jake hesitated before getting into his car. "About dinner," he began. Emma glanced at Minha, who was distractedly playing with her teddy bear in the back seat of her own car. "At 8, she finally replied. "But no fancy restaurants." Jake's smile lit up his face in a way that made Emma's heart race. "I know just the place." As they drove home, Emma reflected on how life had curious ways of bringing people together. 3 years ago, one night had changed everything. Now another night was approaching, promising perhaps not quite as dramatic, but equally significant changes. The traditional restaurant in Incident surprised Emma. Tucked away in an old alleyway, the place emanated a nostalgic atmosphere with its paper lanterns and soft, traditional music in the background. Jake was already waiting for her at a discreet table at the back, wearing casual clothes, a rare sight for the powerful CEO. "This place," he began as Emma sat down, "is where my mother used to bring me after piano lessons. She said that comfort food was essential after practicing for hours." Emma smiled, imagining a little Jake sitting there, probably still struggling with the intricacies of sheet music. "Mine has the same habit, always hungry after lessons." An elderly lady approached with a warm smile. "Young Jake, how long? Minsu would be happy to see you here again." "Mrs. Park," Jake stood up respectfully. "This is Emma Kim." The lady studied Emma with piercing eyes. "Ah, the little pianist's mother. The news gets here, you know." She winked before turning away to fetch the house's traditional tea. A comfortable silence settled between them as they looked at the menu. It was different from the tension that usually hung over their previous encounters. "How is Minha coping with the media attention?" Jake asked, his concern evident. "She's surprisingly resilient," Emma replied, thinking of how her daughter faced everything with a maturity beyond her years. "But sometimes she asks difficult questions." "What kind of questions?" Emma hesitated, playing with her napkin. "Yesterday, she asked why you don't live with us like her friends' parents." Jake was silent for a moment, his eyes fixed on the cup of tea Mrs. Park had just poured. "And what did you say?" "The truth. That sometimes families are different, and that doesn't mean less love." Dinner arrived, traditional dishes that Minsu used to order. Jake told stories of his childhood there, precious moments stolen between his father's corporate demands. "After she got sick," Jake continued, his voice low, "I started coming here alone. It was a way of feeling connected to her. And then it stopped completely," Emma guessed. "Until today," he confirmed, his eyes meeting hers. "Emma, about that night 3 years ago." "Jake, we don't need to." "Yes, we do," he interrupted gently. "Because that night wasn't a mistake, as I stupidly said the next morning. It was the universe giving me something I didn't know I needed." Emma felt her heart racing. "And what would that be?" "A chance at redemption, to break the cycle my father created, to be the kind of man my mother always believed I could be." Mrs. Park reappeared with a dessert they hadn't ordered, pat bingsu decorated with fresh strawberries. "Minsu always said that candy helps sweeten difficult conversations," she commented before turning away again. "Your plans for revenge," Jake began, surprising Emma. "I know about them. My investigators found the evidence you gathered against the company." Emma froze, her dessert spoon still in the air. "How? It doesn't matter," he shook his head. "What matters is that you chose not to use it. You chose to give mine and me a chance." "It wasn't an easy choice," Emma admitted. "There was so much resentment." "And there still is?" Emma looked at him, really looked, at the man who had turned her pain into purpose, who was rebuilding not just her company, but her family legacy. "No," she answered honestly, "but I'm still afraid." "Of what?" "Of trusting, of allowing myself to get too attached and then—" She didn't finish the sentence. Jake reached across the table, his fingers brushing lightly against hers. "I'm not that man anymore, Emma, and you're not that naive young teacher anymore. We've grown up. We've changed." His touch was warm, sending waves of electricity through her arm. Memories of that night 3 years ago threatened to surface, but they were different now, no longer tainted by bitterness, but tinged with possibility. "There's a benefit concert next month," Jake commented, still holding her hand, "to inaugurate the Minsu Chun Foundation. Youngmi suggested that Minha could play. She'd be nervous. No more than I'll be giving the opening speech," he smiled. "But I think my mother would like it, to see her granddaughter playing on the stage where she used to teach." Emma realized it wasn't just an invitation to an event. It was Jake opening the doors of his world to them, officially, publicly. "I'll think about it," she promised. When they left the restaurant, the Seoul night was surprisingly clear, the stars visible despite the city lights. Jake insisted on walking her to her car. "Emma," he called out before she got into the vehicle, Thank you for today, for allowing me to share this place with you. There was so much unsaid in those words, so many layers of meaning. Emma turned to reply, but was taken aback by his proximity. Time seemed to freeze for a moment, the air between them charged with possibilities. Jake leaned in slightly, his hand brushing her cheek with a delicacy that contrasted with his usual authoritarian stance. Emma closed her eyes, her heart thundering in her chest. The sound of a passing car broke the moment. They walked away, both aware of how public the place was. "Good night, Jake," Emma whispered, quickly getting into her car. As she drove home, where Minha was sleeping under Sujin's care, Emma realized that some changes happen not with grand gestures or dramatic statements, but in quiet moments over tea and shared memories. In his own car, Jake held the extra ticket for the benefit concert, a soft smile on his lips as he planned the next steps in his own redemption. The buzz of the press in front of the Soul Arts Center was deafening. Emma was adjusting Minha's dress backstage, trying to keep calm as photographers jostled outside, eager to record the first official public appearance of the Chen heiress. "I'm nervous, Mom," Minha whispered, clutching her teddy bear like a talisman. "Remember what Youngmi said," Emma replied softly. "When you sit at the piano, imagine it's just you and the music." The Cultural Center had been completely transformed for the inauguration of the Men Su Chun Foundation. The old auditorium, where Men Su used to perform, now sparkled with a renovation that blended traditional Korean elements with modernity. Jake appeared backstage, impeccable in his dark suit, but Emma noticed how his hands trembled slightly as he held the notes for his speech. "Daddy." Mine ran to him, who picked her up naturally. "Are you nervous too?" "A little," he admitted, surprising Emma with his honesty. "But do you know what your grandmother used to say? That nervousness is just excitement in disguise." An assistant appeared, announcing that there were 5 minutes until the start of the event. The auditorium was already packed with Seoul's business elite, selected journalists and, to Emma's surprise, dozens of children from social projects who would be the foundation's first beneficiaries. "Miss Kim," Park Sung-ho approached unexpectedly. "Can we talk for a moment?" Emma exchanged a quick glance with Jake before following the counselor to a more private corner. "I wanted to apologize," Sung-ho began, his usual authoritative posture replaced by something more vulnerable, "for my initial behavior towards you and Min Soo." "Min Soo? She was my best friend in college." Emma blinked, surprised by the revelation. "She? It was through her that I met my wife, who was also a pianist," he continued, a nostalgic smile on his lips. "When she fell ill, I promised to look after Jake, but I think, at some point, I confused caring with controlling." The soft sound of the piano reached them. Youngmi was making the final adjustments to the instrument on stage. Seeing Minha, Sung-ho continued, "It's like Men Su is back, not just for the music, but for the way she's healing old wounds in this family." Before Emma could respond, the lights flashed, signaling the start of the event. She quickly returned backstage, where Jake was waiting with me. "Is everything all right?" he asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "Yes," Emma smiled, unconsciously adjusting his tie, just discovering that some stories are deeper than they seem. The event began with Jake on stage, his presence naturally commanding everyone's attention. His speech, unlike the usual corporate presentations, was deeply personal. "My mother believed that music was not just an art form, but a bridge between souls," he said, his voice carrying an emotion that made Emma feel a tightness in her chest. The Men Su Chun Foundation is not just about preserving her legacy, but about building new bridges. Backstage, Minha held Emma's hand as she waited her turn. Youngmi had joined them, murmuring words of encouragement. "And now," Jake continued, "I have the honor of introducing someone very special. My daughter, Minha Kim Chen, will play a composition that my mother wrote for me as a child." The silence in the auditorium was palpable as Minha walked up to the piano, her little blue dress shimmering under the lights. Emma felt tears well up in her eyes as she watched her daughter sit at the instrument with a gracefulness reminiscent of old photographs of Men Su. The first notes of the composition filled the space, soft, hesitant at first, but gaining confidence with each bar. Emma noticed several members of the audience discreetly wiping away tears, a especially those who had known Min Soo. Jake had returned backstage, positioning himself next to Emma. When their hands touched lightly in the darkness, neither of them moved away. "She's perfect," he whispered, his eyes fixed on mine. "Yes," Emma replied, realizing that he was talking not just about the performance, but about the entire journey that had brought them there. When the last note echoed through the auditorium, there was a moment of reverent silence before the audience erupted into applause. Minha bowed slightly, just as Youngmi had taught her, before running back into her parents' arms. The rest of the evening passed like a dream, performances by other young musicians, announcements about the Foundation's programs, emotional encounters with Min Soo's former students. But for Emma, the most significant moment came later, when they found Jake looking at an old photograph of his mother in the renovated lobby. "She'd be proud," Emma said softly, my falling asleep in his arms after all the excitement. "Not just of her," Jake replied, his eyes meeting Emma's with an intensity that made her heart race, "but of us, of how we turned a story of hurt into something beautiful." And there, under Min Soo's serene gaze in the photograph, Emma realized that some symphonies take time to fully understand, but when they find their rhythm, the melody is simply perfect. The success of the Min Soo Chin Foundation's inaugural concert was still reverberating through the Korean media when Emma received an unexpected phone call from Youngmi. The elderly woman's voice trembled with emotion. "Emma dear, I found something in the conservatory's old archives. You and Jake need to see it." The conservatory was silent that Sunday afternoon, with only the distant echo of a few piano notes. Youngmi was waiting for them in her room, a dusty box on the table. Minha was playing in a nearby room under the care of one of the assistant teachers. "I was organizing the documents for the renovation when I found this," Youngmi explained, taking an old diary out of the box. It was Min Soo's. Jake picked up the notebook with trembling hands. His mother's elegant handwriting filled the yellowed pages with faded blue ink. "March 15th, 1995, he began to read aloud. "Today Jake had his first piano lesson. His little fingers still stumble over the keys, but his eyes shine with the same passion I saw in his father years ago, before the Chen Empire turned him into someone else." Emma watched as Jake swallow dryly before continuing. "Sun Ho warned me about the rumors in the council. They want me to stop teaching. They say it's not appropriate for the wife of a Chen. But how can I give up music? It's like asking me to stop breathing." Youngmi took another envelope from the box. "There's more. Letters she wrote to you, Jake. Letters that were never delivered." Jake's hands were shaking so badly that Emma gently took the envelope, opening it carefully. The first letter was dated a few days before Min Soo's death. "My dear son," Emma read softly, "there is so much I need to tell you, so much that I fear I won't have enough time to express. Your father is not a cruel man, just lost in expectations that were also imposed on him. Promise me that you'll find your own way, that you won't allow the name Chun to define who you are." The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the distant sound of Minha's laughter. "There is more," Youngmi said gently, taking an old photograph out of the box. It showed a young couple in front of the conservatory, Min Soo smiling radiantly next to a man Emma recognized as Jake's father, but different from all the corporate photos she'd ever seen of him. His father was a pianist too, Youngmi revealed, surprising both Jake and Emma. He and Min Soo met here, both promising students. But when he took over Chown Enterprises, he abandoned everything, Jake added, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. Emma thought about how stories sometimes repeated themselves, how Jake had almost followed the same path as his father, burying his emotions under layers of corporate responsibilities. "There's one last thing," Youngmi said, taking an old piece of sheet music out of the box, an unfinished composition. Min Soo started writing it when he found out about his illness. The title is To the Future. Jake examined the score, noting the notes in the margins. "For when my son finds his own way in music." "Daddy?" Minha's voice sounded from the doorway, breaking the emotional moment. "Can I watch too?" Jake drew her close, sitting her on his lap as he showed her the sheet music. Emma watched as Minha's small hands traced the notes on the paper, so similar to the gesture Jake had made moments before. "We can finish together," Minha suggested innocently. "Grandma's song," Youngmi smiled through her tears. Minsu would love that. While Minha tried out a few notes on the living room piano, trying to decipher the unfinished melody, Jake approached Emma. I understand now, he said softly, why my mother was so insistent on keeping music in my life. She didn't just want to preserve a tradition, she wanted to preserve a connection that now passes through me, Emma added softly. The sound of the piano filled the room as Minha began to play Mensu's incomplete melody. It was a bittersweet song, full of hope and longing. You know, Jake murmured, his eyes fixed on his daughter. I spent so much time trying to be the son I thought my father wanted, that I forgot to be the son my mother knew I could be. Emma felt her fingers intertwine with his, a gesture of comfort that became something more. Youngmi discreetly left the room, leaving the little family in their moment of discovery and healing. Minha's music echoed through the conservatory, mingling with Mensu's memories and the promises of a different future, a future where legacies were not chains, but wings to fly higher. And as the sun began to set, painting the room in golden hues through the old windows, Emma realized that some stories need generations to be fully told, and that love, like music, always finds a way to continue its melody. Jake's private office on the top floor of Chen Enterprises was buzzing with the renovation team. Architectural plans covered his desk, showing the project to transform an entire wing of the building into a cultural center. Mr. Chun, the contractors need your approval for the acoustic modifications, his assistant informed him, handing over another stack of documents. Jake was watching the city through the panoramic window when his phone vibrated. It was a message from Emma with a photo. Me at the piano, working on Mensu's unfinished composition. Something inside him warmed at seeing his daughter so absorbed in her music, just like her mother used to be. Cancel my afternoon appointments, he instructed his assistant. There's something I need to do. Seoul's traffic was chaotic as Jake drove to the cemetery where his mother was buried. It was the first time he had visited since finding her diary. With a bouquet of white lilies, her favorite flowers, he walked down the winding path to the marble headstone. Mother, he began softly, it took me a while to understand your choices, to understand why music was so important. But now, seeing his words were interrupted by the sound of soft footsteps on the grass. Emma was there, holding Minha's hand, both of them carrying sheet music. Sorry, Emma said quickly. Youngmi mentioned that you might be here. Minha wanted to show Grandma something. Jake felt his heart squeeze as he watched his daughter shyly approach the headstone, her small fingers tracing the letters engraved in the marble. Grandma, Minha said with childlike seriousness, I've finished your song. Would you like to hear it? She opened the sheet music and began to softly sing the melody she had completed, her clear voice floating among the trees of the cemetery. Jake felt unshed tears burn his eyes as he recognized the themes of his mother's original composition, now interwoven with something new and hopeful. Emma approached silently, her hand finding his in a gesture that had become increasingly natural over the last few weeks. She worked on it for days, Emma whispered. She wanted it to be perfect for today. Today? It's Mensu's birthday, Emma explained softly. Youngmi told us. The weight of this realization hit Jake like a wave. In the midst of corporate pressures and personal transformations, he had forgotten the date that his mother always made a point of celebrating with music and joy. Minha finished her impromptu performance and ran into her father's arms. Do you think she liked it, Daddy? I'm sure she did, little one, he replied, his voice breaking. Your grandmother always said that music is the purest form of love. As they walked back to the car, Jake felt an inexplicable urge to share something he'd been holding back for weeks. Emma, he called out, while Minha was distracted by her tablet in the back seat. I found something in my father's files. Something about the night we met. Emma froze, memories of that corporate party resurfacing. My father knew who you were, Jake continued. He had checked out all the guests. He knew you were a teacher, that you were there at Su Jen's invitation. My initial hostility was programmed. What do you mean? It was a test, Jake explained, bitterness in his voice. He wanted to see if I would follow the Chin protocol of turning away inappropriate people, and I did exactly what he expected. Emma processed the information in silence, recalling the humiliation of that night, now tinged with a new understanding. But then I went back to the bar, Jake continued. For the first time in my life, I disobeyed protocol, and it was the best decision I ever made, even if it took me 3 years and a wonderful daughter to realize it. The sun was beginning to set when they arrived at the conservatory, where Youngmi was waiting for them for another Minha lesson. But today was different. Several of Men Su's former students had gathered for a small celebration in her memory. As Minha played the complete composition to an emotional audience, Jake observed how his daughter had inherited not only her grandmother's musical talent, but also her ability to touch people's souls through music. You know, Emma commented softly beside him, sometimes I think that our meeting wasn't accidental, that maybe your mother somehow was orchestrating the whole thing, Jake added with a small smile. Knowing her, I wouldn't be surprised. The sound of the piano filled the conservatory with promises of a future where music and business, love and duty, didn't have to be mutually exclusive choices. And as Jake watched the two women who had transformed his life, Emma with her resilient love and Minha with her musical innocence, he finally understood the true meaning of his mother's legacy. The golden light of dusk bathed the main hall of the Hotel Latte, where 3 years ago it had all begun. Emma was absent-mindedly adjusting the sash of her dress as she watched the guests arriving for the Men Su Chun Foundation's first charity event. "Mommy, it's tight," Minha complained as Emma fixed the lace on her concert dress. The little girl's hands were still, nervously clutching the scores she had so lovingly completed. "Nervous?" Jake asked, approaching silently. He looked elegant in his dark suit, but Emma noticed that he also carried that familiar tension in his shoulders. "A little," Mai admitted, rushing to hug her father. "What if I get Grandma's song wrong? Your grandmother used to say that the best performances aren't the perfect ones, but the real ones," Youngmi interjected, arriving with a small bouquet of flowers. "And you, dear, have the truest heart I've ever known." The hall was full of familiar and new faces. Park Sung-ho chatted animatedly with a group of potential donors, while Su Jin coordinated the events team with his usual efficiency. "It's strange to be here again," Emma commented softly to Jake, as they watched Minha rehearse one last time with Youngmi. "This time it's different," he replied, his fingers lightly brushing hers. "This time I'm making the right choice." The event began with an emotional speech by Youngmi about Men Su's legacy. The former teacher talked about how a single person could touch so many lives through music, and how that legacy was now continuing through a new generation. When Minha took to the stage, the silence that fell over the hall was almost palpable. Her small hands found the piano keys with a confidence that made Emma's heart swell with pride. The composition she had completed, "To the Future," began softly, Men Su's original notes flowing naturally into the conclusion created by her granddaughter. It was a musical bridge between past and present, between loss and renewal. Emma felt Jake's fingers intertwine with her own as they watched her daughter play. At that moment, all the hurts of the past, all the plans for revenge, seemed to belong to another life. After the performance, while the applause was still echoing through the hall, Jake surprised everyone by taking to the stage. Emma noticed that he wasn't carrying any paper, something unusual for the ever-prepared CEO. 3 years ago," he began, his voice carrying an emotion rarely shown in public, "I made the mistake of letting business protocol dictate my choices. Today, in this very place, I want to do it differently." Emma felt her heart race as Jake called her onto the stage. "Along with me." The flashes of the cameras captured every moment, but for the first time, it didn't matter. "Emma Kim," Jake continued, now speaking directly to her, "you've given me the greatest gift anyone could ever receive, the chance to be better. Through me, through your forgiveness, you showed me that legacies are not prisons, but foundations on which we can build something new." He knelt down, eliciting surprised gasps from the audience. "I'm not just asking for your hand in marriage. I'm asking for the chance to complete our own composition, our own story." Emma looked at Minha, who was smiling radiantly beside her, at Youngmi, who was crying silently in the front row, at Sung-ho, who nodded in approval. Somewhere, she imagined Men Su smiling, knowing that her last wish, to see her son find his own way, had come true. "Yes," she replied simply, her voice tinged with emotion. Later, when the party was in full swing, Emma found Jake in the same bar where they had first talked. Mine was asleep in Young Me's arms after an emotional night. You know what's funny? Jake commented, swirling his glass of whiskey. I spent years trying to prove my worth through acquisitions and mergers, but it was by losing control, by breaking the rules, that I found something truly valuable. Emma smiled, remembering how everything had changed. And I came for revenge, but I found healing. Mom once said, Jake continued, that some melodies need time to find their perfect harmony. I think I finally understand what she meant. From the main hole, the soft notes of Into the Future began to play, the recording of Minha's performance. It was a song that spoke of loss and new beginnings, of wounds that turn into wisdom, of love that transcends generations. To the future, then? Emma asked, raising her glass. To the future, Jake agreed, his eyes shining with unspoken promise. And for all the symphonies we're still going to compose together. Outside, Seoul shone under the stars, a city of infinite possibilities. And somewhere, the notes of Men Su's song kept echoing, reminding us that some loves, like some melodies, are eternal.